Hello everyone, this is Professor Hill. This is a short video for our class, Introduction to Ethics 2306 here at St. Philip's College. As you know, today is Tuesday, my gosh, January the 30th, 2018. We're at the beginning of week 3, and we're up to chapter 2 in our textbook, Doing Ethics by Lewis Vaughan. Now this chapter, chapter 2, is actually called Subjectivism, Relativism, and Emotivism, which is kind of interesting because when you look at the very first page of the chapter, he says, I'm going to talk about 4 things. And then he outlines them. And those 4 things are subjectivism, relativism, and emotivism. And then guess what happens? He then says, and the 4th is objectivism. Now you're thinking to yourself, I wonder why that one didn't make the title of the chapter. Because then you look at it's got that little quick review box in there too. And sure enough, right there in the quick review box, it's got all 4: subjectivism, relativism, emotivism, and objectivism. So then you start to go through the chapter, and sure enough, he's got not 4, but 3 big parts. A big part for each of the 3 things that he's talking about in the title of the book, in the title of the chapter, which is subjectivism, relativism, and emotivism. So you're thinking to yourself, now you get to the end of the chapter and you're like, now hold on a minute. Where did objectivism go? Because it was at the beginning, and then it's in the quick review box, but then he didn't talk about it. In fact, when you go through the chapter, he only mentions it one time, and it's actually between the 2 chapters on cultural relativism and emotivism. At the very end of cultural relativism, he mentions objectivism. There's one sentence there. It's just this sentence. It says, some form of moral objectivism is true. So what he's done is he says there's these 4 things. One of them's the right answer, objectivism. And so the whole chapter is him beating up on these other 3 concepts. And in fact, as you read through it, it's just a laundry list of everything that's wrong with these other 3. So I want you to kind of keep that in mind. Take this whole thing with a little grain of salt. Because he doesn't talk about objectivism, about what it is, what are its good points, what are its bad points or weaknesses. He just says that one's the right one. One sentence. And then, again, spends the whole time and effort of chapter 2 tearing these other apart. Now, he makes some good points. I mean, he's in there scoring points. He tears up these others, and they deserve the criticism. He makes some good points about their weaknesses. But he doesn't even discuss objectivism, other than he does define it in that quick review box. He says objectivism is the belief that some moral principles apply to everybody. There's some rules, some moral absolutes that apply to everybody. And that's what, in fact, you'll note even in the quick review box, he gives the 4. With objectivism, he just gives the definition. The others, he gives the definition and then immediately has a little section called implications, right? This is the things that are wrong with it. Even in the quick review box, he just tags 3 out of the 4, whereas with objectivism, he just gives you the definition. So I want you to be aware of the fact that the guy writing the chapter is coming into this saying, I'm not an equal, teacher about these definitions. I'm saying this one's right, the other things are wrong. You might not pick it up just reading through it the first time, focusing on the definition and learning what they are and learning the drawbacks. But if you step back and look at it, that's exactly what's happening here in chapter 2. So let's just start today with objectivism. It's his belief that some moral principles are just objectively true. They're going to be, he wants to take the same thinking from science or math. Some things that, there we have things which are always absolutely objectively true. 1 + 1 = 2. And it equals 2 no matter where you are, what culture you're in, what time it is, whether it's 50 years ago or 100 years in the future, doesn't matter. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Always has, always will. Because it's just objectively, and when we say objectively true, we mean that it's outside of our subjective perspective on it. When you think about it, you don't even get to really have an opinion about whether 1 plus 1 equals 2. It's not your opinion that it equals 2. It just is. So it doesn't care what your subjective perspective on it is. You don't get to have your own one. You don't get to say, well, for me, 1 plus 1 equals 36. It doesn't work like that. We just learn what it is because it is already objectively true, this thing. And whether you're talking about gravity in science, whether you're talking about addition in math, these things provide us with some certitude because we know, we can count on the fact that those things are absolutely always objectively true. And we like that. And he wants to drag that same thinking into ethics and morality. He wants to say, look, there's just some things which are going to be always right, or some things which are going to be always wrong. And again, because they're objectively right or wrong, it means it doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter when this is happening, 100 years ago, 100 years from now. There's some principles, some rules that we can discover, not create, discover, that are objectively true. That's objectivism. Now, we do want to be careful about this because we have to always be aware of the role of absolutism. And what I mean by that is, you might think that there are some rules like don't lie. It's a good rule. There's some people that look at that, and we'll get into more of this later when we get to chapters 5 and 6. People say, well, look, that's a rule. It's an objectively true rule. It's a principle that applies to everybody, everywhere. That's our definition of objectivism. And so, you shouldn't lie, ever. That's just the way it is. Now, if you say, I apply that rule absolutely everywhere because it's always objectively true. When you set it up like that, one counterexample kind of defeats your whole argument. So if you find one instance in where lying is morally acceptable, might even be the virtuous thing to do, well, then all of a sudden that kind of deflates. Not that somehow the lying is bad and you shouldn't do it, but it's the always part. It's always true for everybody everywhere. That's the absolute part. And so some people want to hedge that and say, well, look, there are rules and principles that we can learn about, but I still want to have an exception. I might run into one situation when pushed to an extreme, I want to have a get out of jail free card. I want to be able to say, well, in some circumstances, maybe there's an exception. That's the difference between having a general rule or principle which has some exceptions versus one which doesn't, the absolutism. Let's see how that goes, because when you look at the definition in our book, there's nothing about exceptions there. It's just that it always applies to everybody everywhere. It's objectively true. As we're going to see, that's a difficult position to defend. Not in math or science, where lots of stuff fits that category. But in morality, we're going to see that context matters. Unless you're in that camp which says, I'm an absolutist, I'm an objectivist, and there are some rules or principles that apply to everybody everywhere. So that's what it is. And in this chapter, like I said, he doesn't discuss the nuances of it. He just lays it out. One sentence says it's the right thing. Bam, let's start attacking the other guys. Now, I'll come back to subjectivism and relativism tomorrow, the next day. And we'll talk about what I think he really gets right about those concepts and some things which I think are straw man issues, which is that he attributes to these concepts extremes that many people who hold them as a philosophical belief, they're in that school of thought, wouldn't try to defend. So what he does is he, sets up the easy target to tear apart. But more of that tomorrow. For today, just want to talk a little bit about objectivism, point out that it's hiding in just one sentence in our chapter, and introduce these core concepts, starting with the one that he doesn't talk about. Tomorrow we'll get to the ones that he does. So take care. Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.